Hello and welcome back to RWR Plays TEW 2020. This is chapter 6 of our Odyssey through WCW that we are booking from the beginning of May 2001, as if the company was never bought by WWE and instead was taken over by Fusion Media Ventures, headed up of course by Eric Bischoff, who we are playing as the booker of WCW. Now, a little nudge in the direction of the subscribe button. If you haven't done so already and you want to continue to follow along with our series, that's the best way to keep up to date with the new episodes coming out relatively regularly, not quite twice a week, but more than once a week at least at the moment in this early stage. We're also going to now quickly focus on what we did on the last episode of Nitro. We are, of course, 2 weeks now removed from the Big Bang, still 3 weeks of episodes to go before the Great American Bash. And the main event of Nitro last week saw the Steiner brothers defeat Booker T and Sting by countout when Jeff Jarrett came out and brawled with Sting on the outside of the ring, leading to his countout. The Steiner brothers win the match, and then afterwards the Magnificent Seven beat Booker T and Sting down and left them laying in the ring as they celebrated as Nitro went off the air. That was, of course, a little bit of a preview of what is to come at the Great American Bash, the War Games match that was set in motion a couple of weeks ago, which will see Sting and Booker T plus two yet to be announced teammates take on the Magnificent Seven in a match where if the Magnificent Seven win, Scott Steiner receives a title shot against Booker T, and if Sting's team win, then the Magnificent Seven have to disband. Also on last week's show, we furthered the feud between Kurt Hennig and Ric Flair. We saw Tommy Dreamer make his debut for WCW. We saw 3-count advance in a tournament for a number one contenders spot in the Cruiserweight Tag Team division. We also saw the first in the massive 8-women round-robin tournament to crown a first WCW Women's Champion between Jillian Hall and Alexis Lurie. Of course, it's Mickie James. That will continue pretty much a match a week, which will mean that the whole thing takes about nearly 6 months, or about 6 months anyway, to complete. So a long tournament that one will be. We also saw DDP confronted by Team Canada, and then Kevin Nash coming out and backing up DDP, and that leading to this week's main event, which will see Team Canada take on the Insiders, DDP and Kevin Nash. Okay, without any further ado, we're going to go on to this week's Nitro. So this week's episode of Nitro is coming from the Temp Auditorium in Arizona. There are 1,766 people on hand. We have mainly focused on our shows on being in the Southwest, even though we're actually more popular in the Southeast region and in the Mid-Atlantic region. But the reason we're doing that is because our base in the game is in the Southwest region. The story being that Eric Bischoff and Fusion Media changed the headquarters from being in Atlanta over to Las Vegas. So that does impact the game mechanics a little bit. And if I remember to do so at the end of this episode of Nitro, I will add a little bit of information about that because people who've never played TEW 2020 might not understand what I'm talking about there. Anyway, Chavo Guerrero Jr. defeated Jamie Noble in the first of a couple of dark matches that took place before the main show. This had a segment rating of 54, Chavo 52, Jamie Noble 41. Pretty good match in general, and this was just a way to get both of these guys some ring time. The other dark match we've got today was a 6-man tag, Johnny the Bull, Conan and Shane Helms against Bam Bam Bigelow, The Wall and Mike Sanders. Again, just trying to get some ring time for these guys. Bam Bam Bigelow pinned Johnny the Bull after 9 minutes 55 seconds. Segment rating of 51. Everyone was pretty decent. Well, Johnny the Bull was pretty poor actually. The Wall and Mike Sanders also not great, but the other three really decent, especially Conan actually, a 59. So Shane Helms is currently our Cruiserweight champion, of course, and all the others are not currently really doing anything, but certainly from some of the performances there, it suggests we should be using them a little bit more regularly. So now we go into the show proper, and we start with a 4-way tag team match to determine the new number one contenders to the WCW Tag Team Championship. Before the match, briefly, a graphic is shown that announces that the Magnificent Seven team at War Games has been decided, and it will be Scott Steiner, Rick Steiner, Ric Flair and Jeff Jarrett who will be facing Sting's team at the Great American Bash. This match itself, segment rating of 45, All relatively decent in terms of the in-ring rating and in-ring performance of the different wrestlers. The wrestler of the match was Brian Adams of Chronic. So this is Jindrak and Stasiak versus Alex Wright and Norman Smiley versus Chronic versus Sean O'Haire and Chuck Palumbo. And the match ends in nearly 15 minutes when Sean O'Haire pins Sean Stasiak. So O'Haire and Palumbo, having lost the belts to Bagwell and Luger, totally buff at the Big Bang, will be getting their rematch as a consequence of winning this four-way tag team match here on Nitro. Next up, we have an angle where Tony Schiavone is in the ring and he announces Sting to the ring, brings him out, and they talk about the attack at the hands of the Magnificent Seven last week. Sting says that he's been expecting it. This is what comes when you fight a war. He says he's got experience in this territory and he'll be ready to mete out the punishment of the Great American Bash to all that were involved. The two of them are then interrupted by Kurt Hennig, and Kurt Hennig comes out and tells Sting that he wants in. He wants to join the team at War Games. Sting says that he doesn't know if he can trust Hennig. He says that Hennig doesn't exactly have the best track record, especially at War Games. Sting questions where Hennig was last week, for example, when he and Booker T were getting their asses beat. Hennig, however, fires back angrily that he was being thrown out of the building by security trying to get Flair, and that's why he was unable to come out to the ring and help them. He tells Sting that he may not trust him, but he needs to put that aside. They have a common enemy, and he'll do whatever it takes to make Ric Flair's life a misery. Sting, at first, looks conflicted, but eventually holds out his hand to Hennig, and they shake hands. Hennig is the latest member of the War Games team. Up next, Kanyon faces Jim Duggan in a singles bout and defeats him in 7:52 with a handful of tights. Kanyon has an in-ring performance 59, Jim Duggan 44, segment rating of 51. This is just our continuing journey in terms of building up Kanyon. Next up, we have Mike Tenay explaining that WCW management have received a video to play this week from Vampiro, which Vampiro says further explains why he is targeting Hugh Morris at this time. The video features Vampiro talking to a camera from a darkly lit apartment and saying that Morris has spent too long trying to be someone that other people want him to be. He says Morris has been doing this for so long that he may not even remember that it isn't who he really is. He says that the Jolly Giant is an act, and behind the smiles is a darkness that needs to be freed. So segment rating 51, this continues the mysterious story going on between Vampiro and Hugh Morris. Next, we have a match between the Great Sasuke and Lenny Lane. Sasuke is the internationally revered star WCW had been promising on this show. Segment rating of 43, Great Sasuke 47, Lenny Lane 28. Given that Sasuke hasn't got a huge amount of popularity in North America, this is actually a pretty successful segment in general. Both of these guys made their debut here. Lenny Lane, although a regular of WCW for much of its run, wasn't with the company when I began the game. We've brought him back in simply because he's a good influence backstage and we need some people to do some jobs, and so Lenny Lane felt like a decent option there. Sasuke gets the victory, and really good start for his run in WCW. We do have a bit of a problem with Sasuke. He owns Michinoku Pro Wrestling, which means that I can't sign him to a written deal, and also that he prioritizes Michinoku Pro Wrestling shows if they have one on the dates that we have a show, and therefore I don't have the same booking freedom that I would like to have with him, but we're going to look to book around that and see what we can do to make that not to be such a factor. So immediately after the match, we go to Jerry Lawler and Mike Tenay, who are just summarising the show so far ahead of an advertisement break, when Stevie Ray interrupts them at their desks, and he says that he wants them to get his brother out here because he needs to talk to Booker T as soon as possible. He says that he's been looking for him backstage and hasn't been able to find him, and time is of the essence. The segment rating 49 here, very, very quick little bit of something before an advert break. When we come back from that break, Booker T makes his way out to speak to Stevie Ray, and Stevie Ray starts to talk to him. He says that because he's no longer on the WCW announce team, he wasn't at ringside last week when Booker T and Sting faced the Steiner brothers. Instead, he was at home watching on his sofa, and he watched on as Booker T and Sting got beaten up by those thugs from the Magnificent Seven. He tells Booker T that he's not willing to do the same again come Great American Bash, and he says that all his life he's been looking after his brother, and he's not about to stop now, when Booker is facing possibly the biggest fight of his life at the Great American Bash. He says, therefore, that he's coming out of retirement and will stand side by side with Booker T, Sting, and Kurt Hennig at War Games, and together they will put the Magnificent Seven down. Booker tries to protest, telling Stevie Ray that his injuries are the reason why he decided to retire, but Stevie tells him that Harlem Heat will ride again one last time. You can see here Stevie Ray's really underwhelming and that he was terrible with no script to follow. His dialogue was a mess, but the performance of Booker T made up for it as he was fantastic. Segment rating of 59, and Stevie Ray now appears to be added to the War Games team alongside Sting and Kurt Hennig and Booker T. Next up, we get the latest match in the women's title round robin. This one's between Amber O'Neil and Kana, who of course WWE fans will now know as Asuka. This one went for 5 minutes 35 seconds. It had a segment rating of 22. Kana was very good, 25. Amber O'Neil only a 13 here. Both of them still trying to establish themselves. This is their debuts. Both of their gimmicks as well got a rating of awful, which wasn't the best either. Next, Tony Schiavone stood in the ring and he introduces the crowd to Tommy Dreamer for an in-ring interview. Tony Schiavone asks Dreamer how it feels to get his first win under his belt. Dreamer says it's great, he's feeling good, and he's just looking forward to the next one. But he is then interrupted by Kanyon, who comes to the ring with a microphone and says that he is sick of all the hype Tommy Dreamer has come in with. He says that Dreamer is being given the red carpet treatment even though he's just come from a place which died because nobody wanted to watch. Kanyon says that in the meantime, great talents like himself have been ignored, even though earlier on today he got a big victory of his own. Tony Schiavone suggests that the reason he's not hyped as much is because Kanyon had to cheat to win his match. Dreamer tells Kanyon he's got no beef with him, but if he wants to get physical, let's fight this out next week on Nitro. Kanyon accepts the challenge, then stares Dreamer down before backing away. Segment rating of 46, Tommy Dreamer did a masterful job of improvising interactions with the crowd, and Kanyon also improvised well. So this looks like a good setup here for a story between Dreamer and Kanyon. Good start to what they're doing. Next up, the second semi-final in the Cruiserweight Tag Team No. 1 Contenders Tournament, Air Raid versus Elix Skipper. AJ Styles pins Elix Skipper after 8:56 in what they're calling a terrible match. AJ Styles a rating of 33, Air Paris 29, Kid Romeo 28, Elix Skipper 35. Both teams a little weak here. Segment rating of 37. Air Raid make it through to the final where they will face 3 count next week to determine the new No. 1 contenders to the Cruiserweight Tag Team titles. Then the cameras go backstage to Goldberg, who is with Tony Schiavone for an interview ahead of his next matchup. Schiavone asks Goldberg who he will team with to face the franchise players at the Great American Bash. Goldberg says he doesn't care, he's happy to take on all 3 all on his own. However, Tony Schiavone reminds him that, as he understands it, Douglas was quite clear. Without the partners, there will be no match. So if Goldberg wants to get his hands on Douglas, he needs to find some partners. At that moment, Air Raid arrive backstage following their victory in the previous match, and Goldberg pulls them into view of the camera and says that these 2 guys will be his partners, and then walks off for his match, leaving Tony Schiavone, AJ Styles, and Air Paris looking confused. Goldberg then goes out for his match, which is next against Reno, and beats him in 4:46 by pinfall. Again, Goldberg looks great, Reno doesn't look great, so the segment rating is only a 48, but it's another victory for Bill Goldberg. Next we have Ric Flair and the Magnificent Seven coming to the ring, with Ric Flair holding a book. Flair explains that when he was CEO of WCW, he got quite familiar with a book, the official WCW rulebook. He says that after he heard that Booker T would join Sting at War Games last week, he got to thinking, when will Booker be defending his title next? He points to the book and says that the official WCW rulebook clearly states that a champion must defend the title once per calendar month. But as Booker T would be fighting in War Games, he was presumably not going to be defending the title at the Great American Bash as well. So what he wants to know is when is Booker T defending the title and who will it be against? He says that if Booker T doesn't defend the title either in the next 2 weeks on Nitro or at the Great American Bash, the precedent has been set before that Booker T should be stripped of the belt. He and the Magnificent Seven then leave the ring. Segment rating of 61. Ric Flair, Scott Steiner both look good, and the angle got the crowd hotter ahead of our main event, which is Team Canada versus the Insiders. And in an exceptional match, the Insiders defeated Team Canada in 17:34 when Kevin Nash pinned Mike Awesome. You can see here Kevin Nash actually had a really good in-ring performance of 74, Awesome is 66, Lance Storm is 64, and DDP is 65 for an overall segment rating of 70. During the match, Tenay announces that he has just gotten word that Eric Bischoff will address his Flair statement next week on Nitro, and reminds the fans that Tommy Dreamer will face Canyon one-on-one, and Air Raid will be up against 3 Count in the final of the Cruiserweight Tag Team title #1 contender tournament. So a segment rating of 70 is pretty decent, pretty happy with that, and that will end the show in a positive light. Surprised a little bit about Kevin Nash and the performance he's managed here at 74 compared to everyone else, but I think that's again based on more his level of popularity as opposed to his actual in-ring skill. So that's the full show. Again, another show that increased our popularity pretty much everywhere. Overall rating of 63. The Insiders and Team Canada, a really good main event there. We've also got, lots of other things that have been moved forward. We now know the full teams for the War Games. We've got Scott Steiner, Ric Flair, and Jeff Jarrett going up against Sting, Booker T, Stevie Ray, and Kurt Hennig in the War Games match. We've seen Goldberg basically out of nowhere picking his partners for the 6-man tag by having just happened to have seen Air Raid coming through the curtain when he was being asked about it and picking them. We've seen Tommy Dreamer and Canyon set up a match for next week. We've seen the latest match in the women's round robin. We've seen Great Sasuke debut, and it's been a kind of an okay episode of Nitro. Nothing major going on in terms of no major turns or anything, but it's a solid 2 hours of television where lots and lots of things have been progressed and moved forward. So that is the end of another week's worth of television, but there is one thing I did want to go through. I said a moment ago or before the show, I wanted to look at one thing with you, which was the base, kind of our base location for the company. So this is the screen where you see the size of your company effectively, and these numbers represent how popular you are in each region of the United States. And you can change this to be Canada, where we're not actually too bad off as well, Mexico a little bit less, British Isles a little bit, similar to Mexico, Japan a little bit more popular than we are elsewhere, Europe, and then Oceania and India, where we don't have any real popularity at all. But the USA is where it really matters, because that's where our base location is. And I said our base location is in the southwest as opposed to the southeast, which would have been much easier because we already have a rating of 60 in the southeast, whereas we only have 56 in the southwest. That's up from 55 from the start of the game, so we have increased a bit. And the reason that's important is because in order for us to be classed as a medium-sized promotion, we need to have achieved 59 popularity in our home region, which we would have done already had our base location, our home region, I should say, been southeast. So that's why it's significant that our home region is in the southwest of the USA. So anyway, just wanted to kind of explain that for anyone who've never played the game before, or don't really understand that part of it. That is all we've got time for today in our episode. You can just see here, interestingly, a heel turn for Kane and a babyface turn for Triple H in WWF. So they obviously did that on Raw. They also had an awesome show, which they often do, and so did we. Our show was also considered awesome. So yeah, thank you for watching today. If you've liked what you've seen, please give me a like down below. That really helps us out. And as I say, subscribe, follow along to continue to follow along. Thank you for watching, and we'll be back in the not too distant future.